Welcome to the Company Move podcast, where we explore what life outside of the film and television industry could look like by talking to folks who have made the leap. I'm your host, Rennie Pollock, a union second assistant camera person currently living and working in Chicago, Illinois. It's been a rough couple of years, y'all. I know I'm questioning my life choices and trying to find a more stable career path, and I know I'm not the only one because I talk to a lot of you about it. For this reason, I wanted to create a space to have honest conversations from a crew perspective on how the hell we move forward by talking to folks who have. So let's go, y'all. Company's on the move. I'm so excited for you to meet today's guest, Laura DiFiglio. Laura currently is a financial advisor with Northwestern Mutual. She has been in the financial services industry for 3 years now and is a board-certified financial planner and a chartered financial consultant. Previous to this, she worked in the camera department as an underwater technician and second assistant camera person on films and television shows for the better part of a decade. She currently is based in Los Angeles, California, and has a wealth management practice that is tailored towards those in the entertainment industry. Welcome to the Company Move podcast, Laura DiFiglio.
I am happy to be here, Rennie.
So Laura DiFiglio is a financial advisor now, but she started out in camera department. So can you tell me a little bit about your story? What was your job in film? How did you get it? And what was your experience?
Yeah, so I always worked in the camera department. Towards the later end of my days in camera, I was just the second camera assistant, or I was only focusing on that. But when I started, I actually started as an underwater camera technician. So I had gone to college in Chicago, and right after college had moved to LA. And there was a Society of Camera Operators seminar for underwater camera operating. It was like the very first one they ever held back in 2012. And so I went to it, and it was hosted by a company called Hydroflex, which is run by a man named Pete Romano, who's a very, well-known underwater cinematographer.
Yes, Hydroflex is a very well-known name.
Yeah, it's very niche. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so, they hosted it. And so I got to know Pete and everybody that worked at Hydroflex. And it just so happened that him and his assistant were going to work on a movie, and they needed help at the shop to just, clean housings and, just do a bunch of work, like admin work, stuff like that. So that was my first job in LA, was working at Hydroflex. And I worked there for about 2 years and learned from him and his assistant, Lauren Elkins. And then after 2 years there, I went full-time freelance and was still mainly just doing underwater stuff, because that was really just my skill set at that point and what I was known for. And then I got an opportunity to work in Chicago on a TV show where I was a full-time second AC. And so that was really where the transition happened from only doing underwater stuff to doing more, mainstream camera work.
What kind of projects were you working on? Like what TV shows, movies were you working on with underwater with Hydroflex?
If I did movies, it was usually with Pete, because he was the one that would get the call for that, and he'd need like a little team of us. But I would do a lot of music videos or commercials where they would just need a tech. They wouldn't need like a full underwater team. We would do TV shows, but also same thing. Usually it was Pete bringing a team with him. And so I was just on that team.
What kind of, I guess, what names? Tell me the movie.
Oh, yeah. What names, right?
Name drop those movies.
Of course. My bad. My rap sheet. Let's see. Okay, so we did Edge of Tomorrow, that Tom Cruise movie back, I think it was like 2014.
I like to call it the Emily Blunt movie because she was such a badass in that movie.
That's right. Yeah, it was actually a really good movie. But yeah, the whole climax of that movie is underwater, and so it was quite a fun sequence because we spent like a week doing that. Some other bigger movies, I worked on Hail Caesar, which was a Coen Brothers collaboration with Roger Deakins, which was super cool.
Some George Clooney action in that one.
Yeah, and George Clooney. He was not there the day I was there. I was very disappointed, but whatever. So that's another bigger one. Some of the TV shows I did, Animal Kingdom, The Last Ship. Oh, another movie I did, Neon Demon. That was with a different camera operator named Ian Takahashi, who's also a big name in that world. But that was a fun one working with him. trying to think, The Gambler. I think that was a Mark Wahlberg movie. He was in that.
So you started out in some pretty high level stuff.
Yeah, it was incredibly stressful as
Yeah.
especially not having any, because I think I did it backwards, where I started as a technician in really like a high level, really specialized, where normally people work into that role. So it was incredibly stressful. Like I don't think I ever went to set knowing or feeling confident for like the first 3 years. Um, but yeah, it was. But luckily, I had a good team and like good teachers and people I could always turn to for questions. But yeah, it was definitely stressful.
And so then, sorry, you moved to Chicago. You had an opportunity to be a second assistant camera person. Can you just explain for those that don't work in the film industry what a second assistant camera person does?
Of course, yeah. So on a camera team, you've got a minimum of 3 or 4 positions. Well, maybe more than that, but you've got a camera operator, you've got first camera assistant, a second camera assistant, and then hopefully a utility or just camera support, really. Camera operator, right? That's pretty self-explanatory. They're operating the camera. The first and the second camera assistants, right there, working as a team together. The responsibilities of the first, they focus more around I guess keeping the shots in focus and a lot of managerial work. And so as a second camera assistant, I was really in charge of the equipment and making sure that all the logistics were handled when we would, shoot on location or be moving stages, and just making sure we had the right gear when we needed it and the right personnel when we need it.
Nice. And so what show was that you moved out to Chicago for?
Yeah, I worked on Chicago Med for seasons like 2 through 5. So I know the show's still shooting. So, yeah, I was in the early seasons. I worked on that show. So yeah, it was fun, very fun show. I learned a lot. I will say that it was part of the reason I took the opportunity is because I had never done a full show like that before. Usually underwater, you're just called in for that, week or two, or maybe a couple months if you're lucky for something bigger, but you're usually never there from beginning to end of a show. So I really wanted that experience. And I learned so much from that.
Nice. So can you tell me when you started thinking about leaving the industry? Like, did you have an idea in mind? Did something come up that sparked your interest? Like, what catapulted you into a new career?
Yeah, it's a great question. I probably, I always had other interests, and it's not that I liked what I did. However, I never liked it as much as other people I worked with liked what they did. And I would always get really, I don't know, I guess jealous. I would get really jealous that they loved their job so much. And I felt something was wrong with me that I didn't love my job as much, especially when, you tell people that when I would tell people about my background, they'd be like, wow, how cool. So I always felt a little guilty that I didn't love it the same way that so many other people did. So I always was trying to take classes or just explore other things that interested me. So for a time I would take writing classes because I thought, oh, maybe I'm just in the wrong part of the film industry. Maybe I need to be in, the creative side, on the writing side. I took acting classes, right? Maybe it was more, the acting side of things, took directing classes, right? I was just like looking, just trying to figure out if any of it worked. And like this whole time that I was doing this, like taking classes and just trying to figure out if anything felt more natural, I had a financial advisor. I've had one probably since I was like 25, and it all started because I was doing a show abroad in Malta for a couple months, and I had a mountain of student loan debt that my parents were co-signers on. And so, and at that time, my little sister was going to college. And so I was really nervous that if anything happened to me, they would get stuck with all of my debt, and then my little sister couldn't go to college. So my sister,
that's very sweet of you.
yeah, well, but my older sister at the time, she worked, she was an assistant for this financial advisor at Northwestern Mutual. And so when I was telling her about like my worry, she was like, we should get life insurance. I was like, oh, that's a great idea. So she hooked me up with an advisor at Northwestern Mutual just to get like a quick life insurance policy. And I just made my parents the beneficiary so that, if I died, they'd be fine. My little sister go to college, everybody's happy. It's fine. So that started like my relationship with a financial advisor. And they were always just really they're really kind to me, right? And so when I'd ask them questions, they're like, oh yeah, you should start a Roth IRA. And I was like, oh, okay, great. And they were always just really educational. And so when I would ask for more information, they'd recommend books, or they were just always really patient. We didn't meet too much because there's not a bunch that you can do when you're 25 and a mountain of debt. But they were always like, what they could help with, they did. And so as the relationship grew and I started making more money, right, we started making different moves, and it became a lot more interactive. And I had a ton of fun when we'd have our annual meetings, just trying to be like, okay, what's next? What's next? And planning that out. And so it was like, when it actually clicked, like when I realized I should probably do this, was it was right after COVID. I took a show I'd moved back to LA after working on Chicago Med for a couple of seasons. I took a show here in LA, and COVID changed everything. And so like my desire to work in that industry went downhill quickly. And so I did a show that it just wasn't great, and mainly just because like the COVID protocols, it just made it a lot less fun. So I was really depressed. I was like, is this really what I'm doing for the next 30 years? And I just happened to have a meeting, my annual meeting with my financial advisor. And she said to me, she was like, I know we always joke about this, that like you would come work for me, but have you ever thought about just becoming an advisor yourself and getting the education and doing it yourself? And I was like, can I do that? And she was like, yeah. So it started the whole recruiting process and learning like, okay, what do I have to do to actually get into it? And so, yeah, I started going to interviews and like meeting with the people that are in charge of bringing in new advisors. And it just felt right. So I kept going, and here we are, still going. Still feels right.
Nice. Were you scared to leave?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I remember like I was terrified to leave. What was it? I think it was the weekend before I started my official training with to be a financial advisor. I think I bawled like all weekend because I was just terrified that I was like, oh no, what if this doesn't work out? What if, what if I can't make this work? Or, it was terrifying. Yeah, it was definitely terrifying.
And what was the training process like? Did you find that your set skills were transferring to the training process? Like how long of a process was it? Was it paid? Like what was that process like?
Yeah, well, so great question. It's different for every company. So essentially, I run my practice through Northwestern Mutual, but how we operate, every advisor is basically their own business. And so Northwestern Mutual, it's sort of like a franchise, but Northwestern Mutual, they're the back house. So you have access to their platforms, like their investing platforms. They have like a research teams that you use, and like compliance. That's the biggest one, is just having, because the finance industry it's incredibly regulated, which it should be, but there's a lot of compliance that goes into it. So it's different for every institution, like how they bring in advisors and how they choose to pay them, right? For Northwestern, the training was like the initial training was about 3 weeks. However, there's a lot of education you get on the job, like a lot of licensing you've got to get while you're working. So the initial training is like 3 weeks, where it's like an introduction to the company, what your job actually is, where you should focus, and just how to build the career up from that. And that was paid. It wasn't a lot of money. It was like, I don't know, like $2,000 or something. It was very little. But it was mainly just to like, okay, like you're just gonna go through this training. I will say, when you go into a role like this, it is more sales focused in the beginning, right? And I mean that by really like your job is just to get in front of people and explain like, look, these are the services we offer people and how we help them. But the biggest hurdle is just getting in front of people, which is very different from Hollywood, where there's almost gatekeepers, right? Everybody wants to keep you out, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that part was a little different, where I was like, oh, I'm used to people, not wanting, like it was almost backwards. However, I would say that almost all of the like intangible skills that you need to be really good in any facet of set life were instrumental in doing this role.
Oh, say more. Tell me.
So I'll hit on like a couple, because I could go on and on. one of the biggest ones is being able to read a room. And I think because when you're on set, right, a long job is 9 months, right? That's the longest job you're ever going to do.
Right.
That's really not that long in the realm of things, right? But because you're doing so many of those jobs all the time, you're constantly in environments with different people and different personalities. And so if you've been in that industry for a while, you learn how to work with different personalities. More importantly, you learn how you also interact and respond to different personalities, which can be, very telling, and, learning what you've got to work on a little bit.
I'm nodding my head profusely. Yes.
Yes. With a big smile on her face.
Very reflective as well.
Yeah. But I think that is such an important skill especially if you're going into a more sales or client facing role where you're going to be working with people that you're not going to get to know super well right away, but having been exposed to people with multiple personalities and or multiple different types of personalities, I said that kind of weird. It's just, you can start to pick up on the tells sooner. So you know how to adjust your communication. Because that's the biggest thing with like what I do is I've got to figure out how to communicate this potentially really complex information quickly and in a way they're going to understand it. So I think having that exposure to so many different types of people who learn differently, communicate differently, respond differently is huge, right? So that's one of the big ones, being adaptable. Another big one is work ethic. I know, minimum time on set is usually 12 hours, right? That's your day. A short day is 10 hours. You're excited if it's a 10-hour day. More likely than not, it's like 14, right? That work ethic is also, I think, invaluable, because when you're starting a new career, there's so much that goes into it, that if you don't have that, it takes longer to ramp up. And so I saw a lot where, because I was so used to working 12 hours, I would continue to work 12 hours because there was a lot I needed to do. When a lot of people would, quit around the 8-hour mark, there was a lot I was still doing. I'm not saying that's healthy.
Not healthy. The real world quits at 8 hours.
Yeah, I have gotten better about it over time, but in the beginning I did use it to my advantage.
Right.
So I do see how that accelerated things a little bit.
What were some of your biggest challenges or hurdles to the transition? Like what, you mentioned the things that were transferable. What were some of the things that were maybe like surprises to you or just different methods?
Yeah. I would say definitely just the way that, like I alluded to earlier, right? Like Hollywood, it's more who knows you, right? There's more gatekeepers. They don't. It's not. You're not just. You can't just go knock on someone's door.
Right. Nobody likes to hire people they don't know, so
Exactly.
they want to at least have a recommendation from someone they know and trust. Yeah.
Right. And even if you do, get hired on a team, it doesn't mean that you're going to get this onslaught of information, right? They want to make sure that if they're going to train you or give you that time and energy, that you're going to, be someone who sticks around or is someone they can rely on, right? Mm-hmm. So I was used to that sort of, I don't want to say, it's probably the wrong word, but like hoarding of information.
I like to call it Gollum syndrome. A little bit of my precious, like this is mine.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you've got to like earn their trust to get their knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's this little game you play. Whereas in this industry, there's so much to learn that it was like a fire hose where they would just be like, here you go, here's all the information. What more do you want? And you're like, oh, okay. Like, you're just going to give me that? And they're like, yeah. And part of it is because that's not really the hard thing, right? It's not the information. What's really hard is being able to connect with people and get them to open up to talk about their money, because it's a sensitive subject for most people. So they're so willing to give the information because they're like, I mean, that's not even the hard part. So here, have it. Go for it.
Yes. And full disclosure, Laura is my financial advisor as well as many crew member in Chicago specifically. Yeah. But yeah, you definitely do a really good job of like our career, what happens. So you do a really good job of explaining. A lot of it goes over my head, I'll be honest, but you do a really good job of being patient and explaining what it is that we're doing with our money.
Well, thank
So,
you. I try and draw pictures and,
yes,
say, don't
pictures always
worry.
help.
It's doing what it's supposed to, I promise. But yeah, that was one of the big things. Like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, so that was the biggest hurdle. And then also, with I had a lot of freedom, right? Which is cool, but, it can be scary, because ultimately I'm driving the business, right? If I'm not bringing in clients or figuring out how we're generating revenue, right, there's just no paycheck. So that was really different where, when you're on set, you're there for 12 hours. There's going to be downtime, right? You can kind of goof around this and that. It's fine. If I'm goofing around in my business, I'm ultimately, taking away opportunities to generate revenue in whatever capacity that is. So
Right.
that was a little different where I was like, oh, okay, I can't just, like goof around for an hour with a coworker. That's going to cut into things.
Is there anything you wish you would have done differently in the transition?
I'm sure there would be. I would say, I think when I was making the transition, I had asked a lot of people that question. So I'll just pass on what I had heard and then what I wound up doing, which I found really successful. The biggest thing is just knowing the job you're going into, right? And so what I mean by that is if you're going into especially if you're going into like a sales role where, you got to generate your own clientele, like real estate, or you're starting your own business, make sure you've got enough runway to handle that. And what I mean by that is like enough money saved, because I see it when new advisors come in and not that they've come from the film industry, but just other career transitions, and they don't have a really robust savings account to do it, to just handle the ups and downs. They can get into trouble. And so that was the biggest piece I got, was just make sure you had enough money set aside to, just support yourself during the transition. And then the other thing was just learn as much as you can about the career you're going into. And so what I mean is, if you're going into something like real estate or, something else where you've got to get a degree, or I shouldn't say degree, a certification. Cause if you're going like to
A
law school,
license or
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
A license. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Like a license or a certification. I would try and do it while you're still working in the film industry, because that'll do two things. One, you'll be ready to jump. Two, you'll build up that nest egg, so that it's just an easier transition. That was huge. I'm glad I did it that way. I didn't like just decide to leave and have a month or two aside and then have to get all these licensing and be like, oh my gosh. So I would just I guess just prepare yourself as much as you possibly can.
What would you say to employers who are looking for good candidates? What would you say about film industry folks?
I would say absolutely interview them, hire them, for a couple of reasons. One, I think people who work in film, I think there's a lot of people who are drawn to that industry. I think there's a lot of great personalities, right? So you're going to get a character, whoever you're talking to, you're going to get someone, fun in some way. And I also think a lot of people who work in film or on set, they see things uniquely. They've got a unique perspective on things. I mean, otherwise, why would you choose a career that is so it's so fluid in its own way, right? So I think there's a really unique perspective that people who work in that industry offer, that I think they're really quick problem solvers, that I think any career that you choose, we need more of those people who are like, they're quick to action. Because if you think about it, when you're on set and, we got to change this shot, it is all hands on deck, right?
It's an emergency.
It's an emergency, yeah.
We have to get going.
We got to change everything right now, right? I think that is something employers need more of, is problem solvers, people who can see the problem and then act to change it. That's, what I always look for in now that I'm starting to hire people. I'm always looking for people who are actively looking for problems, not in a bad way, but, looking out to improve,
No, I get it.
But then can solve it.
Yeah, totally. Is there anything you miss about set?
Free food. Definitely crap.
Sometimes.
That's true. That is true.
Depends on the show.
Yeah.
Commercials. Oh, such good food.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, yeah, I would say the camaraderie. I would, I miss the team. Even if you've got a couple weird eggs in the
Right.
crew, right? They're still them, and it's fun to have. It's fun to work that closely with people. And I didn't realize how much I'd miss that when I went into a role like this, where I could literally work from home every day, which sounds cool, but when you're used to working with like 50 people all day long, that's one thing I miss.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine most people are going to say that they miss the camaraderie and like the jokes and the fun.
Yeah,
Miss that. Yeah.
absolutely.
What's different about your life from when you were working in film?
Yeah. The biggest thing is, well, there's probably two big things. I have more freedom over my time, which is good and bad, right? You just got to be structured with it. Um, Ultimately, that's what I was looking for, right? It was, I think part of the reason I was drawn to the film industry was I saw it as a way to express freedom and have freedom. But then the reality of it is, you're really kind of chained to the schedule of a show for however long you're working on it, especially if you're on long format. Really, they sort of own you for a while. So I definitely have more time, which now I got to figure out how to have a social life because my social life used to be set life.
It's so hard.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. So if anybody listening wants to be friends, shoot me an email, like, because I'm looking for
Laura
friends.
is in Culver City, California.
Yes.
She's super cool, super fun to hang out with.
Anyone's close, let me know. We can go for a walk on the beach.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have definitely more freedom. I One of the things that I get really mentally exhausted in a good way, where like the type of thinking I'm doing now is so different than the type of thinking where I almost feel like I was more physically exhausted from set,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there's a lot that goes into it.
I want to become second nature too. So it's like you're doing the same, your body has like memory of
Right.
like, I need to
Right.
get this thing. I need to grab this battery. I need to do this. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what comes next. Exactly.
Right. Right.
So I remember being more physically exhausted than I am now. Now I'm like mentally exhausted. Like if I do 8 hours, my brain has been going and going and going for 8 hours. So it's a different type of exhaustion. So it's that's way different than what I'm used to. I need more downtime for my brain, apparently. It doesn't bounce back as fast as my body.
Yeah. Um, and then what was my other question? Oh, what would you say to film people who are looking to make a pivot? I think you gave some great advice already of like make sure that you know exactly what you're going into. Maybe don't make the leap until you're, licensed or ready if you're going into something like that. But is there anything else you would say to people who are like, I don't think I can do this for the rest of my life? How did you do it? How do I get out?
That's a great question. I would encourage trying to take classes in what you're interested in first, just to see if you actually like it, right? Like I thought I wanted to be a TV writer. And then I started taking classes and I was like, oh, this might actually be very difficult, besides actually getting into that field. But this would actually be very difficult for my brain because I don't write very fast and it just might not be what I think it is.
Mhm.
So I would encourage you to like take classes if you're interested in certain things, um, just to see if it's what you're actually looking for and give yourself some time. Like don't put pressure on yourself. I think it took me like 4 years of taking classes with like different, from writing to directing to acting, like all these different types of classes, to figure out, oh, okay, this is more what I'm looking for. And I'd also be open. I mean, I didn't think I was going to leave the film industry. I thought I would just go into a different facet. But here I am, complete 180. So yeah, I would just be open, right? And this would be something else I'd say is if you know somebody in an industry that you're curious about, ask to take them to coffee for like 30 minutes or an hour or something and just pick their brain, right? Ask them like, there's only like 3 questions. People love talking about themselves, right? I mean, look at me talking for like a half hour here. But if you want to ask people like, like all the questions that Rennie's asking right now. But really like, like, why is it that you love what you do? How did you get to where you are? what do you think made you successful if you perceive them to be successful? But just like get their story and figure out like, is it a journey you want to take? Because that's the other thing too is, yeah, from the outside, it looks like I've transitioned out of the film industry. Sure. However, I still very much feel like I'm in a transition mode, but it's partly because my business isn't where I want it to be. I'm in a new transition, I should say. It's not where I want it to be yet. So it's more like, are you okay with the journey you're about to go on?
Yeah, I like that a lot. I did that. I mean, I think our industry doesn't really use LinkedIn, but I think LinkedIn is a very LinkedIn sponsor us, please. Is a very good resource to find people in other industries. And like some of the advice that I got was to just if you have a connection that has another connection that like either ask for an intro or just reach out to them. And most people, like you said, want to talk about themselves, and they're like, especially a lot of people are really stoked about like, oh, you work in film. So they might want to talk to you as well.
Absolutely. Most people, I love that you said that. Yeah, if you know somebody who knows somebody, that's the best way, right? If they can put you on like a group text message or something. But yeah, because I joke about, people want to talk about themselves. It's really, they just want to share, right? And you want to share too. So it's it's a great opportunity to share.
And it feels nice when someone reaches out and thinks that you're good at your job and that they want to learn from you. It's like, it's very, like, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the highest form of, it's like one of the most sincere forms of recognition, I would say.
Agreed. Do you ever see yourself going back to working in film in any way, shape, or form?
I don't. I used to think I would, right? But I don't. The deeper I get into the finance world, I really like it. I'm also a bit of a nerd, so it's a perfect industry for me because it can get really nerdy, and it can actually get like finance is actually pretty technical. So I've always described myself as like 20% technician, 80% creative. And I think that's part of the reason why I was drawn to the film industry, because it has this perception of being so creative, which it can be. But I think a lot of times when you get into the higher level stuff, it's, that there's only so many people making those creative decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, no, my current job, it's the type of technical that it is works really well for me. And there's a lot of ways to be creative that I didn't see before, and that I didn't have in my last career. So no, I won't be returning.
Oh, this is good. That's good. That's good to hear. I mean, like I said, this podcast is not to shit on the industry, but to at least give some inspiration and some possibilities, to have folks think about the possibilities of life outside.
Absolutely, yeah. It's super hard to get in, right? It's really hard to get in, but it's equally as hard to get out. So it's like a support system.
Yeah, I wish someone would have told me that. I worked real hard to get in. And now it's been a rough couple of years.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to add, or anything that I didn't ask that you want to add to the conversation?
No, I think I think if it's something that's been on your mind, that you're just curious about it, just explore it. There's no, and even if you do try something and go back, that's okay, right? Then you at least tried, and nope, this is actually what I really want to do. So I think sometimes people feel that if they leave, they can't come back, right? Or I guess that would be the only thing I would say, is that it's okay to just try.
Nice. I like that. Laura, where can we find you? And if, anybody's looking for a financial advisor, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, you can find me a couple places. For this, let's see, you can find me on Instagram. You're always welcome to DM me on Instagram. I'll probably just ask for your email so I can send you my scheduler link, so you can just book a call, if that's usually the easiest. LinkedIn, if anybody uses LinkedIn. I love that you said, people in film don't usually use LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn. But yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram. It's super easy. It's just Laura_DiFiglio on Instagram. And in the show notes, my email will be there too, which is also just Laura.DiFiglio@nm.com. That's probably the easiest way, actually.
Thank you so much for being my first guest on The Company Move.
I'm very excited.
Yay. Company Move is produced by me, Rennie Pollock, and is produced and edited by the one and only reason you are hearing this so soon, the greatest, most wonderful, Robin LaVecchio. Thanks to Selena Persiani for designing our graphics. Our theme music was written by Cliff Beach and performed by Cliff Beach and Alex Nestor. You can follow Cliff on Spotify. He's also a published author. Get your copy of Side Hustle and Flow anywhere books are sold. Our interstitial music was composed and performed by Gabe Rosen. A special thank you to Keaton Susky for naming our podcast. Have questions, suggestions, or want to be a guest? Write us at companymovepod@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram at companymovepod. That's a wrap for this week, y'all. Thanks for listening. Come on back next week for a new episode of the Company Move podcast.